with a load of people representing their brands. We got a chance to get the final chairs. There's Mark's on it. He's on it. Okay, so in a moment, for the last time for our panelists, I'll ask you to show your warmest of welcomes. But on the stage in a moment, we'll have Tim Ellerton, the Global Sponsorship Manager at Heineken International, Mark Cameron, the Brand Experience Director, Global and Marketing at Jaguar Land Rover, Jose Maria Sanz Miguel. Hi, Jose. Did I get that right? Perfect. There we go. With a name like Oriaduba, I know the pain that sometimes you go through. Institutional Relations and Sponsorship at Telefonica. And to lead them away, please welcome Sponsorship Shade. It's been a long day. Sponsorship Sage. And the man behind the unofficial partner blog, Richard Gillis, everybody. Your round of applause for these guys.
Did you say sounds a bit sage?
I don't know what I said, Richard.
I don't know what you said either, but it sounded fantastic. Okay, so the deal is this. The four of us essentially are going to be talking, and then that bar opens up, and we're not going to be standing in your way, essentially, is the deal. So we're going to sort of rattle through. There's three guys to my left who, frankly, shouldn't be here. They've got quite a lot to get on with. Two of them are Rugby World Cup sponsors and running campaigns there. And we're going to talk to Jose Maria about that as well. Now, before we get going, obviously the context of this is sport and it's sponsorship. What I want to do, first of all, is just ask the guys just to give us a little bit of business context, because quite often we jump into the sports sponsorship conversation. I just want to ask each of you, well, what are the business challenges of the broader business that you represent? So, Mark, can we start with you at that end? What's going on in the world of Jaguar Land Rover?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's an interesting time in the auto business at the moment. I won't mention our German competitors at the moment, but clearly there's a lot of scrutiny globally on the...
I've just bought a Volkswagen diesel, by the way, yeah.
You might be one of the 2 million, whoever many it is in this country. But so there's a lot of challenges. China is a massive market for us. In fact, it's our biggest market at the moment in terms of volume and revenues. So what's happening in China with the devaluation of the stock exchange, etc., is a real challenge. But at the same time as those economic and social global challenges, we are also growing rapidly still. We're bringing new cars to market on both the Jaguar and the Land Rover brand. We've got ambitions to double again our volume in the next 4 years. And become a true global competitor to our premium German rivals. So that takes a lot of planning, a lot of marketing commitment. There's a lot of differences around the world in terms of the brand maturity, and Jaguar and Land Rover are very different in that regard as well. So it's an important part of the marketing mix for us is to make sure that we're keeping away at the brand awareness, but also talking about the values of our brand, which I know we're going to come and talk about. But rugby, therefore, is very important for us, certainly in our more mature markets at the moment. But yes, it's a busy time.
Just before we move on, the idea, so I know, and probably most people in the room will associate Jaguar Land Rover, they feel very British brands. Is that perception different elsewhere, or is Britishness central to it?
British premium is actually really exciting and has been for a few years. It's not just us, the fashion brands. Burberry's a great case study in what they've achieved in the Far East, China, etc. So actually, in our sector, in the premium car brand sector, where lots of our competitors, the established competitors are German, to be distinctive and be different around Britishness is actually really valuable. We have to be very careful as to how we play it, and we play the artistic, creative side of what Britain's great about. We have challenges in terms of the perception of our competitors, very high tech, so we need to go in a different route. We need to be high tech, of course, but we need to stand for something different. And actually, in virtually all of our what we call our deep sea markets, the far overseas markets, being British is an asset. You've just got to be very careful in terms of how you communicate it and not take that for granted. But it does make you distinctive. I mean, and just one last example, the fact we hold 3 of the royal warrants, and we're able to use those royal warrants in our communications on our brochures, etc.
What does that mean?
It means we're official suppliers to 3 of the royal households, so the Queen, Duke of Edinburgh, etc. And that just gives you the right to use a crest, as many brands in this country have. But just to give you an example, the power of being able to use that crest in overseas markets is surprisingly strong.
Jose Maria, let's just talk about Telefonica for a moment, because again, I come to your brand with a less secure footing. I know O2 over here. You're going to tell me that's a thing of the past, and you're separating as we speak. But just give us a sort of 1 minute on the company as a whole, on the challenges.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon. Basically, and maybe some of you are not that familiar with Telefonica. We are, as Richard says, we are the owners of the brand O2, which operates in Germany and in the UK. But we are also, we have over 300 million customers, and so basically we're one of the largest telecom operators in the world. And I would say that our challenges, which are in many cases similar to other telecom operators, is that if you look at the digital ecosystem, and now everybody talks about ecosystems. If you don't have an ecosystem, you're nobody. I mean, but if you look at the digital ecosystem, which is you see that there are some companies that are providing some smartphones and all kind of handsets that are allowing you to get to wonderful content that is provided by some of the companies, like name it Google, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, or even more useful things. And in the middle, what makes that possible is the work of the telecom companies, but it's something that is difficult to see. You don't realize it, so there's a risk of commoditization, of lack of relevance, and I would say that that's the main challenge that Telefonica and many of the companies are facing. What's our position in that value chain and in that ecosystem, and also how we are relevant to our customers, and there's where precisely sport sponsorship plays a very important role.
So just from a marketing perspective, you've got from a brand perspective, Telefonica is a sort of corporate brand, and you've got O2. I mean, the other you've got Vodafone, who people in the in this room will be very familiar from their sports sponsorship market strategy of really painting the world red over the last sort of 15 years. And yours is a different challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's because, of course, of legacy, but also of corporate culture. In many cases, when we have been doing acquisitions, like when we bought O2, that was present at that moment in the UK, but is now also in Germany because it extended the brand to Germany. We thought that it had so much strength and so many important things and so many good attributes that we decided not to change that brand. So, and the same happened in Brazil. We launched Vivo it was a joint venture with Portugal Telecom, and we decided, I mean, in a few years it was so strong also and had so much momentum that we decided to maintain it. So basically, Telefonica, which was formerly the commercial brand, is now just the master brand or the corporate brand, and we are operating in a complex well, not complex, but in an architecture that means that we have O2 as a brand in Germany and in the UK, Movistar in Spain and in most of Latin America, and Vivo in Brazil. And that also makes more challenging some global sponsorships.
Okay, we're going to come back onto that in a moment. So Tim, give us the Heineken story, because again, there's a lot going on in the market generally, but just tell us from where you're sitting, give us an overview of the brand.
Afternoon, everyone. Well, Heineken is the world's international premium beer. As a company, with a third world biggest brewer, although if you read this press, that we might become second in a few weeks' time. I guess our biggest challenge on the Heineken brand is, whilst I guess most people, or at least I hope most people in this room have heard of us, there's still a lot of countries in the world, despite our geographical spread, that awareness is still a big issue. The Heineken brand itself is only up to, I think, 1% of the global beer market, so there's still very much a job to be done there. I guess selfishly, as a sponsorship guy, I believe that a lot of the advances we can make and what we're trying to do with our marketing can be led with some of our sponsorship platforms, and exactly that's what's been happening more and more over the last few years. This is our sixth World Cup, every World Cup since 1995. We've been in the Champions League since 1995 as well, and we've had a partnership with the James Bond franchise for 17 years, and of course the Spectre movie will release next month, of which we're a big part of that. So sponsorship plays a huge role within our business, and in particular with our telling our brand story and engaging our consumers.
Right, so I'm just going to ask a question specifically then on that. We're in the middle of the Rugby World Cup. Your Champions League last night and tonight, very central part of your portfolio. What's the difference between them? What roles do they play? Just give us an idea about the way in which the strategy has evolved.
Yeah, it's a fair question. Get asked it quite a lot. I mean, simply Champions League, whilst it's played in Europe, is, let's be honest, it's a global property, and over 95 markets will activate the Champions League in any given season. It plays much more of an awareness role for us, to be honest. Rugby, on the other hand, yes, it is global, but perhaps its impact, certainly from our markets, is restricted to a smaller number, somewhere between 10 and 15, and with a particular focus on what we call the Big Six, which is the home nations, France, South Africa, Argentina, to extent Australia, New Zealand. But in those markets, it's a very important loyalty driver, and that's, I guess, the key difference between the two. Our loyalty from rugby fans towards the Heineken brand is actually far higher than it is from football fans. We've had a long affinity dating back to 1995, as I said, with Rugby World Cup, and also, of course, the Heineken Cup, now known as the former Heineken Cup. Or Rugby Champions Cup, I should say. They're probably the two biggest differences. Champions League, let's face it, will play more of a role in some of our more developing markets, in Mexico and China, etc. However, we hope that rugby can play that role too. And if I look at some of the numbers coming through already from Rugby World Cup, then we are getting traction in the perceived new markets as well.
Mark, what's the position? Let's talk about Rugby World Cup while we're on the subject. Obviously, very big time for you. Where does it sit? What's the point of it from your point of view?
So, like team with Heineken, we've been in rugby quite a long time on the Land Rover side. In fact, over 20 years, we've been involved in various different parts of rugby. This is our second sponsorship for the Rugby World Cup. We came on about 6 months before the last 2011 World Cup in New Zealand, and this time we've elevated to a worldwide partner. Rugby, we've done lots of work over the last few years just to really nail a few areas of sponsorship that are really important and have a connection to our customers. That's the first thing. And rugby indexes very highly in every country where rugby union is played. It tends to be an affluent, well-educated, high average income customer, therefore ideal for a premium car brand. So, my new CMO boss, who's joined us at the start of this year, is German. Didn't know much about rugby. I took him to the last game of the Six Nations, which was a fantastic climax, if those that remember it. And we walked through the West Car Park, and there's all the tailgate picnics going on with the Range Rovers and the Discoveries and the Defenders. And he said, "Okay, yeah, I get it." And pretty much everywhere where rugby union is played around the world, it's that kind of audience. So it really is a bullseye for us. And then when you talk about the values of rugby around strength, integrity, courage, passion, and how you can use it as a platform to reflect your own values, I think it runs really deep, which is why our platform in rugby is not just the Rugby World Cup, which is clearly the pinnacle and the crown jewels in rugby, but we go right the way through into club rugby at a national level, so top 14 in France. We do Aviva Premiership in this country and others, as well as clubs themselves, the Brumbies, Wasps in this country. And right down to grassroots. So we try and build a pyramid in rugby and get right down to where our customers are and where their passions for rugby exist.
There's a sort of interesting thing going on at the Rugby World Cup particularly. You've got a number of brands, and probably all three, if I label you as O2 for now, is longevity of the rights. So you've been in rugby a very long time. You've been on the England shirt. O2 have been, or in various guises, for 20 years, I think. And likewise, Land Rover have been there a long time. We make a lot of, conferences like this, we talk a lot about activation, don't we? The sexy stuff, the social media, and we'll get onto that in a minute. But actually being there for a long time is incredible asset, isn't it? In terms of when you're trying to build a relationship with the sport, particularly.
I think if you pick it right, and this comes back down to starting with a firm strategy. I mean, different brands new brands that are launching have a very distinct job to do, which is Vodafone, when they used to first launch in terms of getting mass awareness, they sponsored everything, and that might have been right for them at that time. I think once you're a brand that's more established, then you really have to be laser focused, and the job that I have in global marketing is to make sure that actually where we are around the world, in all of our 176 countries that we sell Land Rovers in, that we all sign up to the same strategy, and that actually in Australia they're doing the stuff in rugby union at their level, but look up to the World Cup. And that's the key thing. And you can only build that consistency and support within your regions by doing that over time.
Is that, you said you've got a new guy come in at that level. I mean, quite often, career sponsorship is quite often defined by someone's career, aren't they? I'm the guy that did the deal for Rugby World Cup or whatever. How does that work? How do you maintain consistency? How do you stop the guy at the top coming in or the woman at the top coming in and saying, no, we're going to get out of rugby. We're going to Heineken. We've had enough rugby.
I mean, after 20 years, we obviously, through that period of 20 years, there's been times of scrutiny, and there will continue to be. And I, as a sponsorship guy, I would welcome that. I mean, I'd be worried if a CMO came in and just said, yeah, just crack on, and I don't really, you guys, he or she, or in our case he, has asked and will ask what is it doing for the brand, and then it's up for me to say to him, well, we do extensive research. We do across what it does for our brand awareness, what it does for brand bonding, image, and then finally on ultimately brand usage. And if I can't sit in front of our CMO and say what it's doing against those 4 areas and whether we're successful or not, then I'm going to have a difficult time convincing him to re-sign a pretty pricey contract with, whether it's with UEFA, World Rugby, or whoever. So I personally, welcome any scrutiny in that, and I think consistency over time, to kind of build a bit on what Mark said, the mark of what I would call successful sponsorships. Though if you look at the best ones, they're not necessarily the ones of 2 or 3 years and gone. And speaking, from a Heineken point of view, it's no coincidence that our most successful sponsorships are all 17 years bond, 20 years plus for both Rugby World Cup, Heineken Cup, and Champions League.
I can't agree more. I mean, it's amazing the power of continuity and longevity. We remember, for example, we used to be very active in motorsports, especially in motorcycling. We exited in 2004, and 10 years after, we still were one of the top brands in awareness in motorsports in Spain. So that power, it's incredible. And I think that definitely it's a risk, to have some people coming and changing it for the sake of it. I think that the answer is exactly what Tim said. I mean, data and being able to demonstrate what the benefits of the sponsorship is, and the truth is also the way we see it is that properties and sponsorships are basically platforms. So even if, because the truth also what happens is that business needs may change, a competitive situation will change. So perhaps what you were trying to do, or what your objectives, your marketing objectives, your brand objectives are not the same. But in many cases, the properties you have enough flexibility to change the activation, to change the positioning, and to be able to continue. And the credibility that you get when you're staying over and over for years and years, I mean, I think it's amazing. One of the key issues that we have been talking about is the credibility. Why are you there? I mean, the way of building it, one of the ways of building it is just to be there for decades. Yeah.
Well, in terms of let's just talk then about the sort of relationship between brands and events, because I want to get into this issue of why go the official route. Let's ask that question, which is a sort of a chestnut, but is relevant to the people here. You could easily, or could you, I guess is the question, achieve what you do without buying the rights, Mark?
You can have a good go, but ultimately, one of the things about working with an official body who is the rights holder, and that relationship you have and the trust you have with them to do all they can to protect your rights. Clearly, in ambush marketing, guerrilla marketing, whatever you call it, there will be brands that will try, but ultimately, when you look at the amount of money and effort those brands, unless they have there are some great examples in history where brands have done it brilliantly, but by and large, you have to work really hard if you're outside that rights cordon, if you like. So far better to do it properly, in my view, to negotiate the right rights, the important parts of the rights that you can activate. So really be selective about those that you want. I can talk about our mascot program later on if you want, in terms of an example of that. And then really go for it, and then create that cut through with the rights, with the official, logos that you can use. And I think that's a far more effective way of doing it.
Well, let's just talk about that, because I'm going to ask you about the opening, the toss. Talk about the mascot. How did that come about? Is that your idea? Was it their idea? Were they offering it up? Was it part of a package?
Well, so World Rugby have a series of rights for their main partners, worldwide partners, and I think Heineken were first to sign after us. So clearly there's a discussion, and depending on your timing, it depends what's available, of course. But for us, where we wanted to use the power of the Rugby World Cup to stimulate and shine a light on grassroots rugby around the world, we wanted the mascot program. For us, it was really important. I can see exactly the logic of the toss for a beer brand. But for us, it was about how do we go out to the 20 competing nations with our own program of activation to select the boy or girl that would then hold their captain's hands onto the pitch at Twickenham or the Millennium Stadium, and how you can activate that right across the world. And that's what we've done. And so for us, that was really important, and it got us into the families, into the fabric of the sport, and that was our objective. So that carving out that unique part of those rights into conversation was exactly what we wanted to do.
You know, I think sole and exclusive is hugely important, and exclusivity can only come really with being official. So I came in from the airport yesterday, and you drive along the A4, and there's a big London Pride, and they're obviously doing a poster that's basically insinuating they're a rugby brand. Yeah, that's fine, but our campaign is led by, as you say, we have 48 lucky consumers will be there at the moment of the coin toss between the two captains, and that's an amazing experience. That really is money can't buy. In Champions League we have the back stadium pass. They get to go behind the scenes of the stadium. They then go pitch side to watch the players warm up. That's money can't buy. Well, it is actually. It goes to the rights holder in this case, but the experience is a perceived money can't buy, and that's why I would always err on the official side. Don't get me wrong, ambushes can be done and is done well, and of course a lot of our competitors, particularly in the beer category, which is pretty swamped, are are doing some successful work around the Rugby World Cup, and that's for them. But our position is going to be official. We're running promotions from New Zealand to Argentina for people to get tickets to go to the Rugby World Cup final. You can't, or at least you shouldn't be doing that unless you're an official sponsor.
And we're by the way, the beer it doesn't serve Heineken here, so it's going to be a Carling evening. So I'm sorry about that, Tim.
Right. Glass of wine for me.
Yeah. we're outside of the 500-yard exclusion zone, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. The 500-yard. Gee whiz, yeah.
Is that difficult to communicate that sort of stuff? When sort of specific event related sponsor red tape sort of makes the mainstream news, that's quite tricky, isn't it? I mean, 500-yard zone is quite often misconstrued by journalists like me.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. Well, it wasn't by you.
Well, not by me, but
no. But the 500-yard. I don't know. There was an article about Heineken were the bullies around this 500-yard exclusion zone. First of all, that was something that the World Rugby put in place, and it's actually for the outdoor sites around the stadiums. We will not and would never go to a pub and expect them to delist their regular brand if it wasn't Heineken. That's not what we're about. But however, we do partner with World Rugby to have some protection in the 500-metre zone as it relates to which Mark and the other world partners buy into as well. I mean, there's a Lexus garage right by Twickenham Stadium. I mean, it doesn't get shut down, but I'm sure you're not over happy about that one, Mark. But that's the problem with being. Yeah, but it's the same with us. There's pubs within that 500-metre zone who are serving non-Heineken products. That's absolutely fine. In the stadium, for the rights fee we pay, we expect them. It's not unreasonable to expect that to be Heineken products. Where I think the misconception is, it's actually we are serving a portfolio of our products. Yes, of course, there's Heineken, and we lead with the Heineken brand, and we make no apologies for that. But we also have a stout in Murphy's. We also have cider in Strongbow and an ale in John Smith. So our whole portfolio is served in the stadium. So that the article around that we were bullying other brands out is unfortunately incorrect.
Okay, I've heard you. Right. Just while you're on that, sorry, Tim, it just struck me as you were talking there. You're communicating. There's the rugby is great, and I get it. I'm a consumer of the product. There's the sort of the other message is the drink responsibly message, isn't it? So that's how do you sort of tally that with how you communicate around rugby? Because it's obviously when I've been at the Heineken Cup final, fantastic. I stand up with 70,000 people, and the bloke over the MC says drink responsibly, and we're like.
Yeah, and that's a very important thing for our whole business, for the whole alcohol business. Responsible consumption of alcohol is a hugely important issue, and it's we were one of the first, the first brand to really take that head on in terms of how we do our sports sponsorship, and we gave and still do to this day a third of all our promotional message around pitch side and in stadia is dedicated to the responsible consumption of alcohol, in this case obviously Heineken. It's important that fans go to the game and those of legal drinking age enjoy beer, but do it in a responsible way. It's the misuse of alcohol is not sustainable for our business. So actually a sports platform, I would argue, gives us a very good opportunity to talk about the importance of enjoying Heineken responsibly. But and we also have our own campaign featuring the DJ Armand van Buuren, which is all around that. For those who drink responsibly, the night is actually a lot better, and you end up staying awake longer and you have a better time. And it's important that people do that at Rugby World Cup matches. There's of course some people who misuse it, and there's that's for the local authorities to deal with. But on the whole, from what I've seen, certainly, I think people have been pretty well behaved at the matches.
Jose Maria, let's just talk about your category is a peculiar one, because so much of it is, there's a blurring, isn't there, between you as a sponsor and you as a broadcaster and the rights around that. Take us inside that process and how that's evolving, because it's in that we're all talking about content, but you're in an odd place, really.
Yeah, definitely. We are getting more and more. I mean, both Telefónica and many other telecom companies in the content in the area, and we are buying rights. And definitely, what we see that is as an even bigger opportunity. And we definitely are having synergies. In many of the cases, we are being able to sponsor both. Sponsor a team or a sport person who is also on our network, so that's definitely a win-win situation. But even more than that, the thing is that content, is changing so much the way people watch sports, and and even if they are doing it on TV, they are doing it with their smartphones or the tablets. They are tweeting, they are on social networks when they do it, even at the stadium. A couple of years ago, something very strange happened, or a tipping point happened in the stadiums, which is normally the traffic going into the stadium was bigger than the traffic going out, but suddenly now it's much more traffic, telephone or data traffic going out of the stadiums, because people there are broadcasting, are sending pictures, are doing all that. So definitely what we see that as a huge opportunity, and that's one of the reasons why we are where we are sponsoring many of these sports, because we definitely think that one of the ways of making people realize the potential of technologies, and that's what we think that the reason why we are on business is because we believe that people can live richer lives with technology, with communications. And one of the best ways of realizing that is where people feel passionate about. And if they see what they can do with a smartphone and with a connection to enjoy more their favorite sports or their favorite passions, they can realize that they can use that and they can do the same everywhere. So definitely it's a big opportunity.
Well, Mark, I'm going to ask you a question about this because, sorry, I'm going to ask you a question on this. You've got enormous range of possible options in terms of how to activate the rights that you've got, and we're looking into content, into viral films, into the social media area. And as Jose Maria said there, that there's an enormous appetite for sharing at a sports event. How do you make that decision? Where do you spend your money, your activation money? How do you prioritise?
It's two key levels really. Firstly, just because of the sheer size of a Rugby World Cup, 2.4 million tickets sold, whatever it is, we have a big guest programme. So number one, having a good CRM system, making sure that you know who your loyal, most valuable customers are, and making sure that they, along with your other targeted guests, whether they be media or our retail partners, have a great match day experience. So investing actually in the match day experience, the hospitality we create at Twickenham, etc. That's one level. And through that you build loyalty and repeat purchase, etc. At a wider level, we try and talk to two audiences. It's the rugby committed, as we call them, so those people that will not miss a World Cup game for anything, and the Six Nations and everything else. And those then that are what we call the big eventers, the sports fans, the people that probably realised the World Cup was coming maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, but then have really got engaged with it. So we need a campaign, an idea, which we think is going to talk to the rugby committed, but be of interest to the wider sports fan. And for us, in terms of putting our messages out, the campaign for us is We Deal in Real, which is a whole series of short films around shining the light on grassroots rugby around the world and what's great about rugby. So making sure that we secure the broadcast rights, so that's a big part of our investment. So in 8 of the rugby mature markets, we are one of the sponsors of the broadcast idents, and we've made over 50 films, 5-second films. So I think one thing that irritates everybody is when you get burnout on the ident. So what we've tried to do is make sure we have a good variety of films on the broadcast coverage. And then in social media, which is really important, is that we've actually pre-tournament looked at a lot of the players that will be featuring in the World Cup and looked right back at where they started playing rugby and telling these vignette stories, these short films, photography with, and using Twitter and Facebook and the rest of it to actually put that content out live during the games. And in that way, we've engaged hundreds and hundreds of rugby clubs around the world. In fact, only about half of them in this country. The other half are overseas that really want to tell their story and engage with us as a brand through that. So I would say in terms of percentages, the highest percentage is in securing the broadcast rights. This is beyond the rights fee, obviously. Then it's what we're doing in digital, and then it's creating that match day experience.
Just on the social bit, there's a sort of looking at, so Dan Carter, for example, has got 450,000 Twitter followers, which for a global star is quite low, isn't it? I mean, it's relatively, and it's more than Tim, obviously, but it's low compared to some of the footballers. What is there a sort of perception? And there was a good stat. Adobe did a stat where 6 of the top 10 highest paid or highest rated players are not on Facebook, and there's a sort of sense that actually there's a bit of a hole there. That from a brand's perspective, that rugby, the players are less compelling as properties. Is that a fair assessment?
I'm not sure. I mean, it depends per market. I mean, I guess UK is a bad example because, of course, we are predominantly a football nation, and we have the David Beckhams and Wayne Rooney's of the like, which are always going to be very much at the highest when it comes to social media and followers, etc. Dan Carter in New Zealand, on the other hand, he is the David Beckham of New Zealand, and Quade Cooper, or to name up one in Australia, probably has a far bigger following than for football players from Australia. I bear to mention one, to be honest. So I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I think the opportunity for Rugby World Cup as well will bring out, there will be someone at the end, and we hope it's an England, I hope it's an England player, not the Heineken brand, me personally, but there will be someone who is a hero and go into Johnny Wilson or Dan Carter territory. We don't know who that one is, or maybe it'll be Dan Carter again. So I think I don't necessarily agree with that of course football's going to dominate, and we have a Twitter campaign all around that actually for Champions League, which we're now replicating to an extent in rugby, but we're still finding a lot of interest in social media, because especially at this period it's short, sharp, 6 weeks, and in the rugby, the phrase you use is the big rugby markets or whatever, that's the people we're talking to, and they're definitely behind it.
And if I can jump in, what I think is that also you need to take into account the cost benefit, because it's true that maybe the global awareness of the rugby players is smaller, but on the other hand, it's probably easier to really not own, but to be relevant in that sector. I mean, Tim mentioned Beckham. I mean, to really be associated with Beckham is much more difficult than to be associated with a rugby player. So I think that there's always, you don't always need to go to the highest, more aware or more famous person in the world. I mean, you can do much more, many more things on a more cost-effective manner with lower, aware.
I think you have to be really careful as a brand as well, because it's not just about reach. It's the consumer, the public are very cynical, and they know when someone that has 2 or 3 million Facebook followers or Twitter followers, if they're plugging a brand or being paid for it. And it doesn't really do you any favours. I think if you've got a more organic link, we've got 25 rugby ambassadors around the world, playing and non-playing, retired. And when we talk about a campaign like We Deal in Real, they want to engage with it. We did a rugby match. We hosted a rugby match with the smallest rugby club in the world about 3 months ago as a lead up, and we got some of those rugby ambassadors as a surprise to come along. Johnny Wilkinson to bring the kicking tea out as a surprise. Clive Woodward in the dressing room, and yes, we'd pay them as our ambassadors to be there. They have a long-term relationship, but they stayed at the bar 3 or 4 hours later with the club in a clubhouse like they started at, way beyond what we asked them for. So I think if you have something where they want to be involved and it's not just seen as sort of cynical commercialism in the public eye, I think it does help.
Okay, good. Right, I've got one more question, but I'm going to throw this out to the sea of hands that I'm about to see here. So if you've got a question, could you just tell us who you are and where you're from, and we will get a microphone to you. Here we go. It'll be a strange, eerie silence, and then I'm saved by a man in the middle there and down the front. John Reynolds at the front there. John, you could shout from there.
Gary's got microphone.
Oh, Gary.
Hi, Gary Link from the Rugby Football League. Just a question for all of you, really, but I think Tim has a lot of experience in this area. Naming rights, i.e. Heineken Cup, versus being a partner of the Rugby World Cup and also a partner of the Champions League, and obviously to O2 as well, owning the O2. Could you just talk about the ROI and which is the best, the best model from a brand perspective?
That's a good question, Gary. I would say that they play a different role. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I know World Rugby are represented today. I'm pretty sure that it's never going to be called the X brand Rugby World Cup. I personally hope it's not. I'm pretty sure it's the same for the UEFA Champions League as well. Heineken Cup's a bit different. We were the founding partner back in 1995. It was actually in conjunction with, before my time obviously, but with people from Heineken and also the what was previously known as the ERC. But that's now gone into a multi-sponsor model as well. That's something we welcomed and actually helped them move towards. So I think there's horses for courses. That particular property played the right role as a title sponsorship for while we're in it, and it now plays the right role that we're not the title sponsor anymore. So, and that there are many other events in the world. The St. Martin Regatta, for example, in sailing in St. Martin is a Heineken St. Martin Regatta. So, it depends what our objectives, and that one is we had different objectives for why we do the Rugby World Cup. It purely depends on what your objectives are.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and if I consider it not on the rugby side, but for example, as you mentioned, the O2 Arena and some other naming properties that we have, I think that the success may be variable. Definitely here in the UK, the O2 Arena, we think it's an incredible success. But it's not only in terms of awareness. I mean, because it's all what is behind. It's something special for our customers that are going there. It's promotions. So I would say that the naming is like the tip of this iceberg, but then there are 7/8 parts that you cannot see that well, but that are equally important, and the whole thing is what makes it successful. Just the naming itself, it's not that worth, I think.
Okay, Martin, unless you want to jump in there, or you? Okay. We had a question. Okay, go on then.
It's John Reynolds. I'm a freelance journalist. Just a quick question for Mark. I think you're a sponsor of Virgin Galactic. Can you talk a bit about following the crash last year? Did you come close to, what impact did it have on your sponsorship? Did you come close to pulling your sponsorship, or how did that, and what's the status of that at the moment? Do we know when the next mission is, or?
I can't talk on behalf of Virgin Galactic about timing. I'm sure they can do that, but it's an interesting one, because the reason why we partnered with Virgin Galactic was because our mantra is above and beyond, and we are an adventure brand, if you like, to our product on land. And what Richard Branson's trying to do with Virgin Galactic in space is pioneer commercial space travel for the future. And therefore we saw a brand fit there. I think the only thing I would say is that, which they've said as well, is these things are hard. And when you look at things that are pioneering of this nature, it's not always, things don't always go to plan. I think the report came out in the summer, which indicated that there were human errors actually in the pilot that was the issue, and not anything fundamentally wrong with the technology of the program. So they will make their own announcements. We are still a partner of Virgin Galactic, and we're with them on the journey. It was deeply regrettable what happened, and obviously our thoughts go out with those involved and their families. But sometimes you have a partnership like that has some risk involved. But we're a brand that wants to not just fall away at the first point of difficulty. So,
okay, there was a question in the middle aisle there.
Sorry, I'm just kind of curious about kind of the role, what you see the role of sport within the context of other pastimes or other passions that you could sponsor. So I think O2 is a really good example where they've got quite a big music and entertainment portfolio, and I'm just curious whether you think sport is more powerful than other areas, or whether it's just it has a different role to play in terms of helping brands connect with consumers.
You want that?
Well, it will depend on the business objectives, on the audience, on the target. I would say that generally speaking, definitely sport is one of the most powerful ones, and that's also the reason why it concentrates most of the sponsorship investment. I think that probably worldwide is 70 to 80% of the sponsorship investment, it goes into sports. So in terms of audiences, definitely. I think that music, it's also very powerful in certain areas, and then of course you have culture. Yeah, you have many, but I would say that there is no a single solution. It will depend on what are you trying to achieve, and especially also in the target market. For certain market segments, maybe some cultural things more could be also very, very effective. But broadly speaking, I would say that it's what drives more audiences, what drives more interest and more passion. Yeah.
I was hoping you were going to do a James Bond answer there. You're going to say one thing about anything about James Bond that's coming out? Any?
Well, I think to answer the question there, we're involved in. There's as many music festivals and events that Heineken involved with as there are days in the year. But we also have, as I've talked about quite a lot today, huge sports properties in football and rugby, and of course the James Bond franchise. So, you could say we're across the spectrum of the three main areas: kind of music, entertainment, and sport. And I totally agree with Jose Maria about the objectives are very important within that. And maybe, for example, rugby doesn't play such a role for our US market. And therefore, the Coachella or the Miami Sound Music Festival will play a higher role. So it's about making sure you have a portfolio that works also for different, whether it's for loyalty, whether it's for increased penetration, whether it's for awareness. I think there's different properties within sport, entertainment, music, and film that can get you there, if you choose the right ones and do it correctly and activate.
And just to build on that, it's a happy coincidence that Jaguar Land Rover is also a partner of Spectre. So we have product placement, and actually that's the point I was going to make, is that some genres like film in particular give you the opportunity, if you're an automotive brand, to have placement in the actual content itself in a very natural way. So they give you different opportunities than you can on a field of rugby, for example. So I think it's the blend of things in your portfolio that help.
And do you get much of a say in the content of the film?
None at all.
What about Heineken? Do they get a...
None at all.
Does he have to drink a Heineken at some stage?
Doesn't have to, but we hope he does.
Okay, right. Finally, before we finish, just one question to each. A very quick answer. There's loads and loads of research data around sponsorship. Just give us one that you take incredibly seriously and one that doesn't matter at all to you. So who wants to have a go at that? Mark, you look like you want to have a go at that one first.
Well, a piece of data that matters really to me, and it's definitely linked to digital marketing, is engagement. So I think it's far more valuable than just the reach or the potential reach that you have through a piece of creative. Those people that will engage, click on, look at, gives you a really good indicator of the quality of your content. And it's then how shared it is beyond that. So when we're looking at key indicators, I would say that that's growing in importance, because it's so easy just to push stuff out there and, we reached a potential audience of X million. But I think engagement is so important.
Okay, good. Jose?
I'll talk also about the one that interests us most, which is probably the impact on the brand. And we have been able, to make some models that at the end tells us what's the impact of each sponsorship on the brand perception, on the different attributes, on leadership, on products and services, on proximity, etc. And I think that basically that's the farthest we can go. I mean, we haven't been able to track in general the effect on sales because there are so many factors that, I mean, there's an inferences, but definitely the effect of a sponsorship in the brand, I think that's very important, and we have been able to isolate it very, very well.
Okay, very good, Tim.
The one that annoys me the most is when someone says to you, household reach. So you then dig in and find out that it's on channel 973 at 4 o'clock in the morning and it only shows once. But much more interested in unique audience. And then to answer the first part, what I like is, I think I hopefully explained it earlier, awareness leading to bonding, leading to image, and ultimately usage. And you need all four to work in order to be successful.
Okay, right, that's where we'll leave it. I think I'm going to hand over back to Ore, but in the meantime, I wonder if you could give our guests here a round of applause. Thanks very much.